Those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Ivey, former UChicago law admission officer. So Anna, for those who don't know you, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly and share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. The nutshell is that I, like you, was once a law school applicant, have gone through the process, took the LSAT, all that fun stuff. Then I went to law school at the University of Chicago, practiced for a while here in Los Angeles, where I am now, went back to the same law school to work in admissions and eventually became dean of admissions there. And then I bounced around a little bit, including a stint at Stanford in the development office. That was super interesting to see how that sausage gets made. And for over a decade now, I've been running my own admissions consulting business. And we specialize in college and law school admissions. And we've got former admissions officers and a great team. Got books out there. We've got some software out there. So we're somewhat multimedia, but this is always fun to do something live.
Very cool. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. I thought this would be timely given the July LSAT yesterday.
Yes.
The big transitional exam.
What a day. I hear there are a few snafus. Always Florida. Why is it always Florida?
I know. When I saw that, I was like, of course it was.
Of course it's Florida. Yeah. Oh, and I don't know if you saw right before we hopped on, the former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stephen has died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but you know what? He was living his best life in Fort Lauderdale at age 99, so, not a bad way to go, I think. But he was replaced by Elena Kagan, who was my civil procedure professor, so, there's the big circle of life. And if anyone has questions that are kind of veering into law school territory, that's completely fine too. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm sure a lot of folks are interested in that. So I was thinking for tonight, what we could do is, since the July LSAT just happened yesterday, given this digital transition, we could spend a little bit of time talking about these recent LSAT changes. Then we could shift gears and talk about admissions, and then just open it up to a general Q&A. How does that sound?
Sounds good. So what have you heard? Have you gotten panicked phone calls?
For the most of the panic things I've seen have been online. They've been, it's kind of like we live in this globalized world where
I've seen something it in Twitter,
something in Florida is like it happened next door. There was like a fire alarm in Calgary, Alberta that interrupted one test center. There were these things in Florida with I think the tablets not working. Some tablets weren't fully charged.
Right. And I read about one where at one test center, apparently they actually had paper tests as a backup. So when the tablets failed, they actually brought out the paper, but apparently that wasn't the backup plan at all the test centers that had the tablets. So
interesting.
A few wrinkles to work out, but yeah, that would be a bit nerve-wracking as the test taker. I'm so glad they're doing the sensible thing and letting you guys, the applicants, see the score before deciding what to do, which is all fair because you're basically the guinea pigs for this thing. And I've gotten a lot of questions from applicants saying, well, but if I do cancel, won't that look bad? And the answer is no. Just don't even lose a second of sleep over that. If you don't like the score, cancel it, no biggie.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about this transitional exam is that LSAC, I think, although they didn't want to admit it to themselves, they kind of knew that there could be some snafus. And so that's the olive branch to help you deal with that ambiguity or that stress, is that if something went wrong, you can cancel and you get to see your score first, so that if it didn't go well, you can always retake. So you don't get your score right away. You're actually not, even though it's digital, where technically I suppose they could.
Of course they could. The GMAT does this. First of all, you can take the GMAT any old day you want, and then you see your score before you even walk out of there, and then you can cancel if you want. So yes, there are more civilized ways to do this, and certainly that would take so much of the stress off of applicants. That we get so much traffic and so many questions right after every LSAT where people are panicking about whether to cancel or not. And it's a gamble, right? It's just a really important data point you don't have, right? And frankly, there's just no good answer to give them, right? I wish I could sort of sprinkle the magic pixie dust and make it all feel better, but.
Well, it's funny. Normally, I recommend against canceling because it's a big question mark. And since law schools only take the highest score, there's not really an incentive to cancel normally. But July is unique because they're basically giving you a $200 prize if you cancel, that $200 being the free retake.
July is a total, I think, a one-off, and it gives you total cover. You're right. There's zero downside. I will say that for the admissions policies, in practice, schools care most about the high score because that's the one they report to the rankings, and this is all rankings driven. But they will see all the other scores, and that's not always the case with other kinds of tests either. With the LSAT, they actually see your score history going back a certain number of years, and at the end of the day, there's still people looking at these things and not robots, and so optics are always there in the background, right? So if someone is really, sometimes you walk out of a test and it was a disaster. You already know, right? I think there still could be some circumstances when canceling the score might make sense, but certainly not this test.
Right. So if you have an embarrassingly low score, then there's no reason to keep that on record. If you're applying to a top 14 and you got a 145, there's no reason to keep that score and get rid of it. If on the other hand, you've got a 168 or a 169, you might want to keep it even if you are considering a retake.
Yeah. And here's too where it sort of, intersects with admission strategy. Going back to the multiple scores situation, there are some law schools out there that say if you have more than an X point score difference, you must write an essay explaining why. To me, that's just the stupidest essay question in the world because the truth is you will never really know why you did better, right? You might have your suspicions, but at the end of the day, it could just be, margin of error. It could be, the way the grading curve worked out. It could be because you had a better day, because you had an awesome LSAT coach, that you didn't the first time. But ultimately, you're not the one grading this thing, right? And so I don't know. I think I always hate those essays. And so that's just a heads up to applicants that for some schools, if you have a decent sized gap between the two scores, they expect you to say something, which is asinine. But there you go. Most schools don't, though, which is more sensible.
That's a great question. Is there anything an applicant definitely should not say to explain a significant score difference?
And God, this comes up so often. I'm not a good test taker. Oh. Because law school, or I have crippling test anxiety. Law school is all about high stakes tests. And then you have the mother of all high stakes tests at the end, called the bar exam. So if you're basically already out there saying, I'm not a good test taker, that is not confidence inspiring. So yeah, I would take that completely off the table.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Because a lot of people will say that to me.
They do.
My scores don't reflect my true potential. It's like the reverse splitter, high GPA, low LSAT. Right. Which is nice for academics, but a lot does ride on one test on one doing the bar exam too.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every time someone said, this score doesn't represent my true potential, and even when they keep retaking it and cluster around the exact same score, none of them represent this person's true potential. And at some point you have to just concede that for whatever the LSAT is measuring, maybe it is actually measuring it quite consistently and quite accurately. So and the people I worry about, and I'd be so curious about your perspective, some of the people I worry about are the ones who sort of want to keep chasing that LSAT forever. They take it twice, they take it 3 times, they take it 4 times, because they're so convinced none of these scores are accurate, right? Mm-hmm. And at some point, when do you call it a day, right?
That's a great question. I actually got it earlier today. I did a Q&A for some students earlier, and people were asking that, like, when is enough enough?
Right.
And, I think that at a certain point, you do want to move on with your life. If you've taken it 4 or 5 times over the course of a year or two, and let's say you're working or you have a family, these other obligations take up too much of your time, you have this on the back burner forever.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you do have to say, maybe a top 14 is not in the cards for me, and you go to a slightly lower ranked school, or maybe a law school is not for me. And obviously, it's hard to let go of that.
It is hard to let go once people hop on that train, right? But what I hear a lot too is this kind of sensibility around like, well, this is a really bad time, but it's never going to be a good time. It will never be a good time to take the LSAT. There will always be circumstances that, make it a bit more difficult. I mean, I hear from people who, some people who are working full time, they're like, well, but I'm working full time. I'm like, yeah, so do lots of other people, and have kids and have whatever. So, that's the baseline.
All else being equal, I think that my intuition says that the younger you are, the easier it is. Because like, especially if you're in college or you're a recent grad, you have your parents supporting you, you have a summer break, a winter break, then fewer family obligations. Honestly, I think there's no time like the present. Just get it out of the way.
Get it out of the way. I will say that I think sometimes it cuts the other way, and which way it actually nets out, I don't know. But I do think some of the older and wiser test takers / applicants are not quite as crippled by test anxiety and just this, because they've been kicked in the gut by life in plenty of other ways that are more important than the LSAT, right? Whereas the younger applicants I work with, this is, the most horrible thing they've ever experienced was getting their LSAT score back. So, just that kind of perspective, that difference in perspective between the two. I think maybe the older applicants are a little bit more zen-like.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. I think that older folks, like middle-aged folks, like where their kids just went off to college, they have some free time. This is like a second career sort of thing. Then it becomes more doable.
Yeah.
I definitely noticed that.
Yeah. Well, I had a question just yesterday that, again, I just had no good answer to. And God, I hate those, where someone said, I have such anxiety around the LSAT, what do you advise? And ultimately, that's not really an LSAT problem. That's a psychological issue, right? That's a mindset. That's not my area of expertise. I would not presume to try to educate people about how to deal with anxiety or test anxiety more specifically, but I hear it a lot. And so, gosh, I'd love to be able to give people a good answer other than go get treated for this, if it really is test anxiety, because I can guarantee that whatever issues you have now that you bring into law school, they're just going to get amplified in law school. So you got to figure it out now rather than later.
Yeah, and the answer to some extent will be personal to the individual, but this is a question I get a lot as well, and I have to have some way to try and help people with this because it does come up.
Right.
So I guess a couple of things. First of all, you want to have your life squared away as much as possible. So sleep, diet, exercise, mindfulness, relaxation of some sort. Mm-hmm. If those things are not all squared away, stress and anxiety can eat you up and your performance can suffer as a result. And then just having a little bit of perspective, like we said, from the older, more mature applicants, to zoom out, bigger picture. What is your best case scenario 3 to 5 years from now if all goes well on the LSAT? And also, what's your worst case scenario? Actually articulate it, write it down, talk it out. Usually things are not as bad as you think they'll be. And they're also not as wonderful as you think they'll be.
Right.
And also, while the LSAT as a whole is very important, it does not all rest on one single LSAT administration, especially since you can always retake. Schools don't average multiple scores.
Right. They used to. I was alive when they used to average back in the olden days. So it's
pre-2006. Yeah.
It's very good that they stopped doing that. Yeah. And in fact, that was what generated that policy change when schools were expected to average for reporting to the ABA and therefore to U.S. News. So many schools were cheating, including some of the top ones, and reporting the high scores. And then for years, the non-cheating schools would complain, right, saying, but we're honest and we're getting screwed in the rankings. And finally, they just said, you know what, okay, fine, you can all report the high score. So that's law schools behaving badly for you right there.
It sounds like an LSAT problem to me, where we're comparing two groups that are not.
Yes.
We need things to be evened out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for those who aren't aware, there is this new LSAT retake limit they just announced this summer, which is, it used to be that it used to be only 3 times in a 2-year period. Then it was unlimited takes, no restrictions at all. But going forward, starting with September, they're going to limit the number of times you can take it. And I want to pull this up just so I have all the specifics exactly laid out here, because these numbers are kind of arbitrary. It's 3 times in a single testing year, 5 times in the current and past 5 years, and 7 times in your lifetime. Those are the limits.
And my understanding is it's not retroactive.
Correct.
So
it's not retroactive.
Starting now. Yeah.
So July doesn't count. Whatever you did in the past doesn't count. But starting in September, it's 3 times until June of 2020, and then 5 times in 5 years, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I get it. There's a seemingly benevolent reason, which is kind of to save test takers from themselves, this obsessiveness in terms of taking it four,
And that's
5, 6
not
times.
wrong. Yeah.
No, that's reasonable. I think
Yeah.
there's a place for that. LSAC also has a self-interested reason, which is that they're reusing a lot of test forms.
Yes, so it's a test security.
Yeah, given that they're administering it more frequently, they don't want people running into the same exam multiple times, which would obviously contaminate the results.
Right.
At the same time, though, I do think that it's not necessarily to test takers' benefit, because the higher the score you get, the more scholarship money, the better the law school you can go to. And so if you could theoretically get a better score through taking it 5 times in a year, that would be to your benefit. But on average, how many people would actually achieve that? Maybe not so many. And if anything else, like LSAC would just be pocketing those testing fees.
Great.
They say this will affect less than 1% of people. And I'm inclined to believe them, even if I don't love all the ideas behind it. But regardless, it is what it is, something to be aware of.
Right. Yep. So that's the new regime there. What else can we talk about? So people will get their score for July.
We did get this question from someone in the chat.
But let me ask this. Are they getting the actual score report back for July or no?
The July test is unreleased.
It's unreleased. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. The downside, of course, is that you can't use that to prep for the next test, right? So
that's true. Yeah, that's always nice to be able to.
That's always nice. All else being equal, I like the disclosed tests more, but
true.
Yeah, I think July was just such a gigantic experiment for them. That
right. They're getting enough complaints already with the tablets and stuff. They don't want questions.
Exactly. But yeah, it looks like we've got some questions here.
Yeah. So in terms of the July scores, when they come back, typically LSAC releases scores 3 weeks later. And that will be the case going forward, even for the digital LSAT, because they do all kinds of detailed statistical analysis after each exam, whether it's paper or digital, to see if the questions performed as expected. You look skeptical.
I'm a little skeptical because other tests don't do this. However, the reasoning I had heard was, well, sure, you could get your score right away if we permitted that for all the digital stuff, but we still need people reviewing these writing samples, and they have to be graded. And oh man, those writing samples are such a kabuki dance. I mean, for the vast majority of applicants, they don't matter in the slightest. I think where they can come in handy for admissions officers is when you have a non-native English speaker and you might be a little bit skeptical about how native the essay sounds. And then you can compare it, to the writing sample. But those are sort of outlier situations, and it just seems like such a gigantic waste of time. And if that is the actual reason for why they're still doing this 3-week window, I'd say, kill that writing sample until it's dead.
Well, I also don't really see the point of the writing sample, except for the case of doubts about someone's English fluency. But
yeah,
actually now the writing sample is going to be digital, and is actually digital starting with June. It's now administered later online. They monitor you with a webcam and microphone from your home or apartment or library, wherever you happen to be.
Some pod, yeah,
a pod, wherever you can camp out and knock out 35 minutes.
Right.
But the July LSAT, they're actually going to take 6 weeks to get the scores back until August 28th, because they want to equate the digital to the paper and see if it's the same. And even if it wasn't the same, they're still going forward with digital regardless. It's not like they're going to admit that it wasn't the same.
Right. And so that has also affected the advice I'd been giving people about whether to register for September, right? Because the dates didn't quite match up, right? You get your score at a point when I think the registration had already closed for September,
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So how are you supposed to decide whether you're retaking it or not? Well, you just don't have that information. So I've just been telling people, go ahead and register. You can always cancel it if you need to, but you might really want that September.
Yeah, I've been suggesting the same. I've been saying, you know what, like let's say you've got this 6-week gap, wait until you get your score back, then September's only 3 weeks later. Are you going to not study for 6 weeks and lose the benefit of that time?
Right. It's just 6 more weeks. Really, in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing. It really is. Right?
And if you think you're likely to retake, like whether you retake in September or October doesn't matter that much. I'd say honestly, you might as well go for both. and I don't love telling people to take the LSAT extra times, but given that there's only a 1 month gap in between these test dates, you've only got to stay fresh on the LSAT for another 4 more weeks.
Right.
And due to that margin of error of 3.5 points on either end, you get 3 points better. That's awesome. That opens up more doors.
With practically no downside risk.
No big deal.
Yeah. Agreed. Ugh, what a year.
Yeah, it's really something.
Yeah. Questions are streaming in. This is good.
Let's tackle some of these. So to fully answer that question from Jennifer, you don't get your score back right away. It's going to be typically a 3-week wait. For July, it's a 6-week wait, but then if you're taking the LSAT in the fall, it'll be the standard approximately 3 weeks to get your score back via email. Let's see, questions here. Someone's asking about, for non-traditional applicants, do's and don'ts, what to discuss when applying, or what to include when applying. Let's say if you're over 30.
Oh, God bless you. Yes, over 30, the old people over 30. So here's the thing. I think your life experience is in the plus column. You have so much on your resume, you have so much in your own sort of personal development, maybe in your education, maybe in your work experience, that you just didn't have when you were a senior in college. And for a lot of people, that's very much in the plus column. So I would treat it as such. It's amazing to me how many, say 30-something applicants think it's something they need to explain or defend, and then they sound a little bit defensive, right, in their whole posture in the application. And it is absolutely not something you have to apologize for. Treat it as a strength and really, really own it. The other thing that I think is really impressive about 30-plus applicants, I can't call them old, I can't, but is that, where was I going with this? Gone. It'll come back.
Don't feel the need to defend yourself.
Don't defend yourself. There was something else, though. It'll come back. I won't forget you. It'll come back when we're talking about something completely different, I promise.
Okay, here's another related question. What about dual degree applicants, like MPH? Does that hurt you? Does that help you? What's the deal if you are applying for a dual degree like JD and something else simultaneously?
Yeah, so I have to give you the answer that you hate, which is it depends, right? I think you're going to have to articulate to both programs why you want or need both programs. And in my experience, a lot of people who are at least contemplating doing dual degrees, it's really just more about the shiny objects and sort of having another diploma from a shiny school on the wall. For example, let's take the JD MBA example. I think having an MBA, if you're going to be practicing law, certainly that's going to be a benefit to you in your legal practice. Do you have to get an MBA to get most of that upside? Maybe not. I mean, you can take classes over at the business school towards your JD. And you can zero in, like, for example, I knew I was going to be a corporate lawyer, for however many years. And so I took financial accounting and I took corporate finance over at Chicago Business School. And that's exactly what I wanted. It was exactly what I needed. And I didn't do other classes in business school that might not have been as relevant to me, supply chain management or whatever, right? So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. You might not actually have to get another degree to really benefit from it. I think in the other direction, I have gotten some feedback that if you're in the business world, in one flavor or another, to include finance or business widely defined, having the JD sometimes puts people off because they don't have fond associations with lawyers. Lawyers are the people who slow down the deals and gum up the works, and they're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and they're not doing the substantive work. And so think about whether the JD part might actually not go over well with the community that you're seeking to join. So so I'll just leave it there. It depends. I think you have to be really honest with yourself about what you're hoping to get out of both degrees. And you're going to have to do that for your own purposes, but also for admissions officers, because they're going to want to know that too.
That's a really good point. So I guess in general, which is always good advice, is to think about why exactly are you seeking to go to law school or go to business school or get an MPH? Like, what are your specific career goals?
Yeah.
Not just for family or because it sounds nice.
Right. Exactly.
All right, let's see. We got a general question on law school applications, personal statements. what's a good approach, how to know what to write about, what not to write about, how to avoid sounding cliche.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a big topic. I would say the most important ways to think about it are that you have to figure out what kind of essay they're actually asking for. And some schools are great and very transparent and very clear about what kind of essay they want, and other schools are just horrendous. For me, the absolute worst flavor of that is tell us something you think the admissions committee would want to know about you. Like, oh, okay, so you're supposed to just be telepathic and pretend you're an admissions officer, and that's just insane. So that's kind of challenge number one. I would say, if in doubt, do the why law essay. Explain why you're doing this. And back to the 30-somethings, that's an area where you should be able to write a much more interesting essay than someone who's still in school or freshly out of school. So definitely use that to your advantage. Oh, that was the other thing that came back. So if you're 30 plus, chances are you are giving something up to pivot over to law. So there's this opportunity cost, right? And so that makes the stakes a bit higher. And I think what that signals to admissions officers is that you're not taking this lightly, right? Whereas if you're a senior in college, it could very well just be the path of least resistance and your parents are haranguing you to go to graduate school or whatever. So that's all in the plus column too, right? But so if in doubt, explain to the admissions officer why you're doing this. It's a huge investment of time and money, right? Not to mention all this other stuff you have to do, like LSAT prep. I mean, it's just it takes over your life, right? So why are you doing this? And a lot of times applicants will tell me, well, I'll figure it out when I get there. And I say, no, my friend, that's not going to work. First of all, that's not going to work because you have to write 2 pages double spaced about why you're doing this. So that's not going to cut it. But then even for your own purposes, law school is going to be in many ways overwhelming, and you're just not going to have the time or the mental bandwidth to just soul search while you're there. And there are going to be so many opportunities when you're there. For example, you want to be fairly strategic about how you use those lunchtime talks, or when they bring speakers in. Many days you'll have to pick one versus 3 others that you won't be able to attend. I had an applicant years ago who he said, I want to be a prosecutor in my community out in the Midwest somewhere. And I said, okay. And then he sent me a picture, 5 years later, 4 years later, where he was being sworn in as a prosecutor in his little town. And he said, because the very first week in law school, he went to a talk and there was a prosecutor there, and he went up and talked to her and they exchanged information and they stayed in touch. And that's, that's really that's sort of the poster child for how, that really helps you if you have some idea going in, because then you hit that ground running, speaking of cliches, and then, you can really make the most of every single day that you're there, because it's not just about your coursework and your grades, it's also about whom do you want to meet while you're there and connect with, and you're going to have some choices to make. Or even when you first start interviewing for summer jobs, I will confess, I kind of walked around going, well, so I should back up. For a lot of law firm interviews, they'll ask you, well, do you want to do transactional or litigation? Or transactional, sometimes called corporate or litigation, even though litigation can also be corporate, just to make things even more confusing. And I remember sort of wandering around thinking, like, I don't even know what that is. I mean, you know what litigation is, because that's just lawsuits, right? And that's kind of the image that everyone has. And that's what first year is really geared towards, is litigation. But I had only a vague sense of what transactional was, and it just kept coming up in these interviews, and I'd had to think of, something to say, and it worked. I ended up practicing transactional law. So I guess, it was persuasive at some point. But, you're just not going to have the luxury of just exploring, you do to some degree, of course, and you're going to be able to explore the most with the different kinds of classes you can take, and that's wonderful. But there you want to be a little bit strategic too, because the first year is pretty much set in stone, but second and third year, totally up to you. How are you going to fill those? And what are you going to look back and regret that you didn't take? You know, I never took criminal procedure. Everything I know about criminal procedure, I learned from Law and Order, you know, which might be enough. That might be all I ever need, right? But I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I had that opportunity. How much fun would that have been? And I just didn't do it. I only learned it for the bar exam. It's kind of sad, right? Anyway, enough about me. This isn't a walk down memory lane, but just be strategic about where you're going. There are a small number of schools, to zero in on the original question again, that are not interested in the why law conversation. And they really want a very personal narrative that might have nothing at all to do with the law. But they are the exceptions. Vast majority of schools would very much be interested in, or even require that kind of essay about why you're going to law school. So sorry, that was a very long-winded way to answer that question. But it's a big question. It's a tough one. As I say, the schools are not always being helpful. And for example, there's a school, I won't name names, top 5, that for a long time, you know, had an essay prompt that sounded really open-ended. And then their dean of admission at some point said, you know, I don't know why I keep getting all these essays about that don't tell me why they want to go to law school or come to my law school. And I thought, well, it's not in your essay prompt. You know, what are you expecting? And sure enough, the next cycle, you know, it was added. And that's a good thing, right? Because now, okay, now you're actually telling applicants what you're interested in hearing about them. And it's not this great mystery in this big black box, right? And I don't think that sort of thing is intentional. It's just admissions officers live in a bubble the way everyone else lives in their own respective bubbles, right? And so they think things are completely obvious that are absolutely not obvious, right? That's just a constant theme. Yeah.
I want to highlight one thing you said, Anna, that was really interesting about the networking aspect. Actually, that's the student who spoke to that prosecutor first month or first semester, first week of law school, and that kind of changed everything for them. And so that's another thing, is that in law school, on top of all the classwork you have to do, there is also that career networking side of things as well. That could be even more impactful in the end in terms of one's career trajectory.
Yeah, and not to mention your classmates. I mean, part of what you're investing in when you're picking a school is what alumni community are you going to be joining for the rest of your life, right? And there's sort of short-term benefits to a certain alumni community, but there are long-term issues as well, right? And my law school class was very small. It was about 180 people. And to this day, I'm so bummed that there were people that I didn't bother to get to know very well. And that's just a crime, because now I see them at reunion or whatever, and I'm like, oh my God, they're so interesting and they're so smart and they're doing such cool stuff. And how did it take me this long to get to know this person better? So don't do that. Don't be me. Take advantage.
What about law school letters of recommendation?
Yeah.
Especially if you're non-traditional.
Yeah, okay. Non-traditional can be tricky because law schools do prefer academic recommendations, meaning someone who has taught you in the classroom. That can be hard when school was a long time ago. It can also be hard for people who have recently graduated or even still in school, but they're at some gigantic school. You know, try getting a recommendation from Florida State or even UCLA. I keep hearing from UCLA people, my professor said he'll only write recommendations for people who were his TAs. Which is kind of crazy.
Wow, that's rough.
You know, so like some people really struggle to get academic recommendations for through no fault of their own, and that's okay. Then go get a job-related one. Hopefully that's possible, especially if you're older and wiser and have been out there. I was working with a woman who went to law school after raising several kids, so she was 40-something when she applied, and she didn't even have a work-related one that she could get because she was a stay-at-home mom. But she ended up getting a recommendation from one of the nonprofits that she was very involved in. So there are alternatives for sure. You might have to get a little bit creative, but think about, you know, where have you been involved with something where you actually had some kind of impact, right? It really depends on your specific circumstances, but they'll understand that if you've been out of school for a while, you know, getting an academic recommendation might just not be in the cards, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty reasonable to me. They just have to meet you where you're at.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And there's some things are possible and others aren't. Now, here's the other thing. Oh my gosh, I get so many questions about recommendations. They tend to, and I'm fascinated because in my mind, it's so disproportionate. Of all the things you should be worrying about, recommendations are not up there. And just for the simple reason that most recommendations are kind of blandly positive. The recommendations themselves don't really stand out a whole lot, and they're not getting coached on how to write a standout recommendation, right? And you're probably not even going to see what's in it, so you'll never know, right? But they're sort of blandly positive, and most of the time they just end up validating whatever what the decision was going to be based on all the other components of the application. They very rarely change the outcome. So make smart decisions when you're deciding whom to ask, and then just stop stressing about it. The one real thing that comes up a lot that stresses people out is people will say, sure, I'll write you a recommendation, and they'll sound totally enthusiastic about it, and then they just go missing in action. And it's rolling admissions, so you just think, okay, well, I'll just wait some more, and you're emailing and you're calling, and this person is just missing. That happens more than you would think. It's pretty appalling after someone has agreed to write a letter for you, and then they just, they ghost you, basically. That happens. So I would always say, for most schools, you really only need 2 recommendations. Go get 3 as insurance. So if someone flakes out on you, which happens, it's not going to hold up your applications. And then if that third person finally reemerges and gets a letter in, fine, it gets there when it gets there.
And also ask for them early.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I think recommendation writers, especially the academic ones, they procrastinate just as much as their students do, if not more. So honestly, if you give them a whole big runway and this big, lead time to write a letter, they're still going to wait until whatever deadline you give them. And you should give them a fake deadline, that won't cut it too close with when you're trying to submit. Yeah, they'll probably still wait until, the very end of that window to write it, but at least it gives them some flexibility because they have lives too. They've got courses to teach, or they're on sabbatical or whatever, or they've got, mom who broke her hip or whatever, right? So that if you give them a longer window, then they can figure out, okay, if I'm going to spend an evening working on this thing, I can figure out the right time to do that.
Nice. Thanks for that, Anna. We got a few on the July LSAT specifically. They were asking Q&A function here, so I'm just going to copy those here for everybody. So,
I'm so excited to see all these questions coming in.
So the question was, is there a way to figure out what was the experimental section on the July LSAT? Usually you can, because someone got 2 game sections or 2 reading comp sections or 3 LRs, whatever you got 1 extra of, that's your experimental. The July LSAT was unique though. For the first time I can remember, virtually everyone had 3 logical reasoning sections.
That's what I heard too.
Yes, there's no way to figure it out because we don't have a control group that had only 2. So unless we can find those small number of people who got 2 games and 2 LRs, we're really not going to know. And so from everything I can find online and everything I'm hearing from people, there's just no way to know, unfortunately. And since the July LSAT's not released, we're never going to get this released test form and have it tied back to July, or at least not for the foreseeable future. So we're not going to find out right now, unfortunately, but ultimately not a big deal. It is what it is. There's no sense in harping on the past. If you're planning to retake, just focus on the fall LSATs and beyond. As for the experimental nature of this test, how it might affect the scoring curve, that's an interesting question. I think that the content of the exam, of course, is the same, just the format in which it was delivered is a little bit different. And I'd imagine that it's possible those who took digital might do slightly worse due to technical snafus or lack of familiarity with the format or whatever. But regardless, as always, if you didn't get what you wanted, just retake and have that be it. As far as the score curve itself, the exams are mostly equated even before they're administered on a large, widespread basis on previous experimentals. And so the difficulty is already kind of calibrated. And this last question here, when's the writing sample due by? So you actually have a year to complete it.
God, that's cruel.
Which is awful in a way, because then you're talking about runways, Anna, right?
Crazy.
Like people are going to wait to the last minute.
Oh, that's horrible.
People are going to write their personal statements, get their letters of rec.
Honestly, it would be easier if the deadline were like in 2 days. Like you have 48 hours to crank this thing out.
Yeah, just get it done. Don't have it hanging over you.
Let me reiterate that nobody cares about the writing samples, so do not agonize over this. Do not belabor it. Give yourself 48 hours to get this thing done and move on.
Yeah, my recommendation for everyone, including my students, is do it within a week. You could take a few days to relax after the LSAT, but then just knock it out, get it done. It's going to take you literally 35 minutes.
Yeah.
And plus like a minute or two to set up your webcam or whatever. But just get it out of the way. Don't have it hanging over you. The worst thing I can imagine is that your law school applications are ready to be submitted. You've got it done, but LSAC will not release your score to law schools because you didn't do this one little thing.
Yeah. Don't let that be you. Don't let that hang over you. And I'll also state for the record that, or at least in my opinion, the writing sample on the LSAT measures good writing just about as well as the SAT does with the writing section, or the ACT, which means it's a travesty. It has nothing to do with good writing. There's just mechanical rules you're expected to execute, and they can call that good writing. Not in my opinion. It has nothing. They're completely separate. So just treat it as the mechanical thing that it is, and move on.
Yeah, so like very formulaic.
Yeah.
Intro paragraph. 2 or 3 body paragraphs, conclusion paragraph, clear decision. You're picking one of 2 sides, although they're equally weighted. And speaking of the SAT writing, Anna, you're reminding me of how they found that longer essays were perceived as being higher quality, bigger vocabulary words.
I know.
Being higher
Okay,
quality.
maybe that's the one thing that actually does correlate with something in law school. And this might be apocryphal. I haven't seen data on this, but I've just heard it so much in law school and after law school too, which is when professors are grading your law school exams, longer is better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And real life isn't like that. When you're writing legal briefs, there are certain constraints. They even tell you what font you have to use. You don't have to write however many pages you want. So, it's a really sort of unnatural thing. But I guess if that's true on the writing, the quote unquote writing test too, on the LSAT, just keep writing until they call time, right? I mean, just like don't let any, don't finish early, I guess is what I would say.
Right. So it's
keep writing. Yeah.
It's funny, we got like Mark Twain who would say, if I had more time, I would make it shorter. And then we've got legalese, which is we're billing by the hour. Let's show our work.
Yeah. Actually, if I could just segue for a minute, you were bringing up that sort of 5-paragraph, structure for the essay. A lot of people also try to do that with their personal statements. Don't do that. There's really never a good circumstance in which to do that in your personal statement. First of all, because it's kind of short. 2 pages double spaced is not Moby Dick. It's not very long. So if you're doing intro, a couple supporting paragraphs and then conclusion that just kind of says everything all over again, you don't need to remind them so much about what the middle bit is doing, right? And more importantly, you're telling a story. This is supposed to be a narrative, a very personal one. Even if you're writing about your motivations for law school, it's about you. Ultimately, that's the topic. And so you don't want to treat it like an English paper. They're 2 very different things. So if in doubt, just completely abandon that 5-paragraph structure. You don't need an intro. You don't need a conclusion. Just tell your story.
I'm glad you made that distinction, Anna, because a personal statement is, like you said, it's a narrative. It's not an argumentative essay.
Right.
Like the person, like the writing sample might be.
Right.
And Emily here asked in the chat regarding the writing sample, do you have to make an appointment to do it? And the answer is no. It's online. It's basically on demand. You could do it at 3 a.m. if you wanted to. Although they're monitoring you with a webcam and a microphone, they're not monitoring you live as at least that's what I would expect, because they're letting you do it 24/7, 365. They don't have people on call at LSAC's headquarters or halfway around the world just waiting for you to show up. That's my suspicion. I believe that most likely they're just recording the video and the audio in case they had to look at it later for test security purposes. And so you can log on and do it pretty much anytime you want. Like you could, after we log off from this webinar, you can go and do it now if you want, which I'd actually recommend if you can.
I'd recommend that too. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
All right, so I think that's we probably spent too much time on the writing sample given its lack of importance. So let's see here.
Right.
So we got
writing sample and recommendations, the two least important things.
Yeah. All right, so we got a question here from Steven. Are there significant factors that applicants overlook in applying that should be either included or left out?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting one. The most serious issue around that is the disclosures. So some disclosures are required. Every school words the disclosure questions differently just to make it more complicated, right? There's not like a universal disclosure question the way there is in the Common App, for example. No, every law school has to word it differently. And the way they're worded is they kind of assume you've already gone to law school and you know, was this a misdemeanor? Was it a citation? Was it a felony? Was I actually charged? Was that an arrest? If I was put into a diversionary program because I was a first-time offender, does that constitute a conviction? You're supposed to know all this stuff, which is crazy. So don't blow off the disclosures, because under-disclosing can really come back to bite you, not just with law school, but also down the road when you apply for the bar. Because there are certain states, certain jurisdictions that actually will pull up your law school application to look at the disclosures you made. And if you think that the sort of nosiness and the intrusiveness of the application process for law school is, annoying, it's a lot worse for the bar. So don't blow off the disclosures, read them really carefully, and it's very possible that you disclose things for some schools but not others. That's completely normal. Don't let that stress you out. That just means you're reading the questions properly, right? But then they're sort of addendum essays and by addendum I mean anything that's not required, where you're telling them something that they haven't expressly asked for. People write addendum essays for all kinds of reasons that aren't necessarily required disclosures, right? But, maybe you want them to know about what was going on in your life during that really crappy semester that, they'll see on your transcript. So with those non-required addenda, I would say really exercise your judgment, because anytime you're giving them something that they haven't asked for, that they haven't required, you're kind of imposing on their time, and you're making this executive decision like, okay, you should spend 5 more minutes on my file instead of going to the next person because I have to tell you this. So you want a pretty high standard for when you give them something that they haven't asked for, which, is hard, I know, because a lot of times people just want to sort of, make them understand, right, what was going on. But, you really have to mostly stay within these 4 corners of the application. So, that's a very open-ended question. So, I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about on that subject, but those are the most immediate things that come to mind.
I'm glad you mentioned that the idea of the imposition on their time. And that's where I think, as someone brought up in the chat here, brevity. Yeah. It's all about striking a balance, I suppose.
That's right. And this kind of urge to do more than what's required, I would say, use that as a guideline for everything in the application. More is not more. That includes recommendations, back to our favorite, topic. Schools aren't helping matters when they say, oh, we require 2, but we'll accept up to 4. And then there's this arms race, and then there are people on Reddit freaking out. And well, if you don't do 4, then clearly you're not, interested enough in that school, and it just degenerates very quickly. And no, if they require 2, give them 2. You should have a really good reason for giving them more than 2. So do not go into this with a more is more mentality. That's just not the way to go about this.
To go back to, just to put a hard number on the brevity question of character and fitness, what would you say is a good word count approximately for a character and fitness disclosure?
Yeah, so, there are 2 different kinds. One is the run-ins with the law, and sometimes those are really small potatoes, sometimes they're really serious. And then the other kind of disclosure is disciplinary things in school. And they're treated as 2 separate questions, so they're 2 different things you have to worry about. I would say for the small potatoes one, I got busted with beer in my dorm room and I was underage. I mean, that's a paragraph, and you don't need to belabor it. You don't need to wear the hair shirt and, mea culpa. No, just tell them what happened. Boom, you're done. I think ones that implicate larger problems probably do deserve more word count. If you've had multiple DUIs, or you had one that was kind of recent, or anything involving certainly domestic violence, anything involving integrity, like embezzlement, plagiarism is a big deal for law school admissions officers. You might have to say more. So it's really a judgment call. Some things really don't need more than a paragraph. Some things will need a page or two.
Thank you for that. I think that's a good summary on that issue. Now, we've been going for a while here, and I think we've covered everyone's questions. So just to wrap it up, let's look ahead towards the fall. So we've got about, a month and a half till some applications are starting to open beginning of September, right?
Yep.
So let's say somebody is done with the LSAT now. What should they be doing over the next 6 weeks? And then if they're not done with the LSAT, what might their timeline look like, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think if they're aiming for September, whether it's a do-over or the first test, I would say at this point you do need to be multitasking. I would not wait until that test is behind you to start, focusing on the other stuff. I think you can wait to finalize your list of schools until you have your score, because it's pretty hypothetical until then. And we're just, there's a lot of magical thinking that goes on until you actually get your cold hard score, right? But in the meantime, you can be working on that personal statement about why law school, because probably that story is not going to change much from school to school, and it probably shouldn't realistically, right? And then you can always wait and tailor that last paragraph to a specific school and sort of match it up with your overall interests. You could get your resume done, you can get the recommendations rolling. Oh, here's another piece where timeline is your friend, is the academic summary report, which is this incredibly annoying piece of bureaucracy. Everyone likes to kick that can down the road because it's annoying bureaucracy, but when there are snafus, they take time to fix. And I've seen plenty of applicants where that does end up holding up their applications, is some problem with the transcripts. For those of you who don't know, the academic summary report is a piece of digital paper. It's a one-pager that LSAC generates once it has received all your transcripts. So until they have all the transcripts that they require, which is a whole separate, analysis, they're not going to generate this one pager, and your applications will not be deemed complete until that thing is generated. What tends to trip people up are study abroad programs. If you go onto LSAC's website and look at their very long page of how to determine whether a transcript is required or not, it's an LSAT game section of its own. If in doubt, just call them and ask, because whatever they tell you, you can rely on, right? But you don't want to have your applications held up because this program you did in Italy that, that semester or whatever, should have gotten its own transcript, right? And they have really picky rules. Like even if it shows up, even if the credits show up on your home transcript, they might get fussy if it doesn't have grades or it doesn't have course titles or whatever. They're very particular about that, is the bottom line. So don't try to be all knowing about them. Just ask them, and if they require, you basically have no discretion in this. Either they require something or they don't. It's really not up to you. That's sad news for people who really regret that F they got in, basket weaving in community college or whatever. I have classes in community college that I take just for fun, where I'd be very embarrassed if anyone had to pull up those transcripts. So don't lose too much sleep over those sort of one-off situations from, before. I don't think anyone cares too much about that. Your degree granting transcript is really going to be the most interesting one for most people. There's some exceptions, but that's generally the case. But don't kick that can down the road. And again, it's like the writing sample thing, just get it done. And then if there are problems, you have time to fix them.
Nice. Thanks for that.
No, we're just all rainbows and sunshine.
Yeah, right. Do all the stuff that you don't want to
unicorns
procrastinating on. We got so things to do are the writing sample, the academic summary report, and start working on your personal statement now, even if you still are retaking in the LSAT this fall. It's never too early to start thinking about it.
Correct. And it might mean you have to go out and talk to people, whether in person or digital, but you might need to go out and find people who are doing the kind of law that you think you want to do, or even people who are practicing law that you aren't particularly interested in, but you're going to learn from them if you ask them to talk about their practice. and what they would do differently, perhaps. It's going to give you more credibility. It's amazing to me how many people don't do that. So that will really help you when it comes time to write your essay. You can speak more authoritatively about your own goals. And you don't have to have everything pinned down. You haven't gone to law school yet. How do you know what you're actually going to end up practicing, right? All that can very much change, not just during law school, but even over the course of your career. And that's completely fine. Nobody's going to hold you to whatever you put in your personal statement, right? But they want what you're trying to do. How in economics, there's that concept of signaling. The personal statement is designed to signal to the admissions officer when they are inviting this kind of why law essay that you have given this some thought. It's not the path of least resistance. It's not because you just want to stay in school forever, whatever the case may be. There are all kinds of horrible reasons that people go to law school and come to regret it, right? So you're signaling in your essay that you've given this some thought. That's really your mission. You don't have to be super granular, like, well, I want to work on international project finance. Okay, maybe you do, right? But you wouldn't necessarily be expected to know something that specific. But maybe you already have a sense whether you're interested in litigation or not. Maybe you're interested in business deals, right, versus litigation. Maybe you're interested in nonprofit versus the for-profit world. Whatever the case may be, give them some sense that you have actually put some thought into this, and talk to people besides yourself, right? Because that's, sample size of one is always problematic.
Yeah, you could go reach out to some alums from your undergrad on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is perfect for that. And, not everyone has to make themselves available. If even a couple of people just get back to you, that's fine. That's enough. And in my experience, alums are incredibly generous in letting people sort of cold call them, right? It's funny how, having gone to the same school, is this incredible emotional bond. We will take phone calls from complete strangers, but I do it. Lots of people do it. That's just how it works. So yes, LinkedIn is your friend for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Anna, this has been a blast.
We need to do this more often.
Definitely,
this is really fun.
This is great. Yeah.
Yeah, and really great questions. This is giving me a lot of ideas for blog posts I need to write, because I'm in my own bubble sometimes too, right? Which is like, oh yeah, no, people don't know this, right? I have to be reminded.
No, it's amazing. Yeah,
every once in a while.
Get the same questions over and over, but they're good ones.
Yeah.
They're very nuanced, unique ones tonight. These are.
Yeah.
I'll definitely include them in the notes and send them over to you as well.
Fantastic.
All right. So for those who are interested in following up with you or potentially working with you, Anna, what's the best way for them to get in touch? Your email?
Just come to my website, annaivey.com, ANNAIV as in Victor, EY, don't forget the E. And yes, that is actually my real name. I get accused on discussion boards of having invented it. It is courtesy of my ex-husband, so I earned it the hard way. Damn it. So that is my real name, Ivey. Come to the website and you can fill out our contact form. That's the fastest way to hear from us. Or just, read the blog posts. I mean, there's over a decade of law school admissions blog posts there. I've got a book that I just updated. It's on Amazon. So there are lots of different ways that you can sort of learn more from my vast experience. And some of them are, blogs are free, book is cheap. So even if you never end up working with us, that's completely fine. We've got a lot of different ways to put information out there like this webinar.
Nice. Great, Anna. Thanks for that. So I put your website in the chat.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
I put your book in the chat. I see you've got a new cover and the 2020 edition of the Ivey Guide to Law School Admissions.
Yes.
Excellent. Great. That's a great resource. And your blog is a great resource too. I remember we've collaborated on blog stuff.
Yes, we have. We go way back, Steve.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
Good times.
Good times.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely reach out. I'll send an email to everyone with this information as well.
Great.
Following up tomorrow. And of course, for those who want to follow up with me, you can reach out to me through the LSAT blog or the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel or the podcast. And you can also email me. I'll just put the email there. And of course, I'll be reaching out to everyone tomorrow with links and resources related to tonight's discussion.
Well, thanks everybody that you showed up for this. Depending on what time zone you're in, there are probably many other funner things you could be doing right now. So I'm very flattered.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate all your great questions and taking the time with us. And please reach out to either of us with any questions or anything at all you need. We're happy to help however we can. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.